Welcome to the second installment in our throwing shade shadow tutorial video things. I want to talk about making a long shadow that has some fuzziness to the edges, as if light's actually falling off, kind of like what real light might do. Now, my original intent for wanting this, to make this myself, was over in Photoshop, where we can make drop shadows pretty easily. That's been around for a very, very long time. And I wanted to make this kind of long shadow, just kind of like that, actually. And normally I would turn to Photoshop's 3D features. Yeah, well, they're gone. Yeah, it's very sad. And we're still, longing to have them back, but they're gone. So I want to show you how you can do this effect in Illustrator. And if you want, get it over to Photoshop so you can do your Photoshop-y looking stuff. See, as you can see, this is more photo-based than, say, something more graphic like this. But first, we'll start here. So let me actually go to a starting example here. Now, since I'm going to be building this in Illustrator and I want them to match up, if I'm going to bring it over to Photoshop, I'm actually going to copy, Command-C or Control-C, this text right here in Illustrator, and I'll jump over to Photoshop, where I might have a document waiting, much like this one, where I'll paste. And I usually paste as a smart object when given the choice. Now with Photoshop 2022, we can paste layer structure as well. And that actually might come over as a text layer. But I want to be able to do some funky things to this, maybe, and it might be easier just to start with a smart object. So I'll click OK. It comes in. I don't much want to resize it. It's already at the right size. I'm trying to get that better positioned here. Something like that. And I'll commit that location. And I've got a style here, a layer style I could apply that'll give it that look I like. And let me hide the layer underneath it so you can see that it's just the text. There we go. And again, this style can have a drop shadow on it that I built. But anyway, drop shadows, like I said, been around a long time. Doesn't give me that depth that I really want from this text. I want it to look like this text has extent, goes right into that wall, and the shadow is casting onto the wall a shadow of this thick text rather than this what seems to be just thin sheet metal. So let's see how we can get this to be more enjoyable. Back to Illustrator. So same version of Photoshop in which 3D disappears, it appears better than it used to be in Illustrator. We have had a number of 3D effects, and there's some classic versions, and now there's also this 3D and materials grouping of effects. There's the classic, the old stuff, which is actually buggier than ever. And now we have this new stuff. And so if I were to choose extrude and bevel, which is what I'm going to choose, we get something similar to what we used to have. And I have these X, Y, and Z controls, so I can rotate this around in interesting ways if I want, and it's more responsive and it looks a little better. So that is definitely an enhancement. But I actually want something a little less perspective, even though it's not quite real perspective. It's more isometric projection. I'm going to come right over here to these presets I have for view angle under object in this 3D and materials panel, which appears when you choose that effect. And I'll come down to just, where is it? Oh, yes, right here. Front. I was looking deeper than I needed to. So just a straight on view, and you're thinking, well, that's not very exciting. Well, it's not the perspective on the object I want, although I do want to enjoy some extrusion depth there, so I'm going to knock that up to roughly an inch. It's the shadow I want from this extruded text, not the extrusion itself. Now I'm going to head over here to lighting, where we can mess with the lighting, its intensity and where it's shining from and how high above the ground and all this other stuff. I'm going to disable ambient light so my shadow doesn't get filled in. You might notice there's an effect on the word itself. And then I'm going to turn on shadows. And something starts to happen. Now, If I want the shadow not to be attached to the text, I can increase the distance, and you'll know something else is happening here, but I'll get to that in a second. I want to keep it attached to the text because I want the text to be nailed to the wall, and the wall will experience the shadow. I am going to lower the height of the light source. So like the sun is setting. Notice how it's getting darker and darker on the text till it goes dark. So I'm going to choose a pretty low angle. I'm just eyeballing it here. I can also mess with the direction, and that's also pretty cool looking. I'm just going to kind of do what I had approximately before. Now, since the height is so low, the shadow wants to go off much farther than the default allotted amount. Luckily, they gave us shadow bounds, so I can extend the boundaries of the shadow. Phew, so it doesn't get cut off. I can also increase the light's intensity a little bit to get some of that bright orange back on the letters. It's looking pretty good. Although you might look at the edges and think, well, it's not that nice. You're right, it isn't. This is only a loose approximation. This isn't the real render. So if I come up to the top of the 3D and Materials panel, there's the Render with Ray Tracing, and right next to it is a little menu where I can control some of the settings. Now, the reason we come to Illustrator is we want vector graphics, and I don't want just a picture of the rendering per se, because it may not be of the resolution I want. So I'm going to render as vector. Good news, it'll be pretty amazing looking. Bad news is, my God, is it slow. You'll see. All right. And let's see. When I turn on the switch here, I can also choose for it to be high quality. And guess what? That slows it down even more. I don't necessarily need the noise reduced. It can sometimes be just a touch noisy, a little bit of granularity, but it shouldn't be too bad. And then get ready for a bit of a nap. I'm going to hit render. Wow, look at that. Yes, we'll be looking at this for a long time, so I'm going to just take a moment here and return when it's done. Okay, that took a long time. It's not quite as bad as maybe Photoshop was when we were doing a really sophisticated rendering. Then I'd go off, have dinner, and come back. But still, if I were to dare to make any changes to any of these sliders right now, I'd be waiting a good long time yet again. But what I do at this point is if I want this in Photoshop, I will take this. I will copy that. And then I'll jump over to Photoshop, where I might put it below the layer that I've got right now. And I will paste, again, as a smart object. And the beauty of these two smart objects is I can edit them in Illustrator again. Now you'll notice, oh, it's going kind of back to Illustrator and rendering this again. So I'll just take a nap here and I'll be back later. There you are. Well, I let it finish rendering and I tried to move it and Photoshop crashed. This is the first release of 2022, so I think there are a couple little things that need to be adjusted. So I restarted, and here it is. I've got the text in there, as you see, and I just squeaked up the shadowed version, which I pasted right underneath, and I scooted up so they matched. I also did one extra thing, and that is I made sure that the opacity was slightly reduced so I can see the texture underneath it just a little bit better. Pretty nifty. Now, this is this tip. And coming up next, I want to show you what's coming. We also have a way to make a shadow I call a spread shadow. And that's if the light source was, say, nearby, like right over here somewhere. The shadow would go outward. And again, I would have used Photoshop's 3D features or the lighting effects filter, which happened to be based on the 3D features of Photoshop, which is also demised. I would have used those to create this effect. Can't anymore. So I have to do a combination of things. Something like the first tip, and using a blend in Illustrator, bringing that here, and then doing some fancy blurring. We'll talk about that next time. And the time after that, we'll talk about something that gives a similar result, but maybe even more photorealistic, using an adjustment to create the shadow, to darken and adjust the saturation and other attributes of the shadowed area in a more realistic manner. We'll see a couple examples of that, but that's in the upcoming 2 tips. Well, thanks for listening.